The apartment was a far cry from the cozy dorm room I'd grown accustomed to during my college years. Its cramped confines and flickering fluorescent lights felt more like a prison than a home, a constant reminder of the isolation that had crept into my life since graduating and moving to the city for my first real job. The walls seemed to breathe with every creak, as if the building itself was alive and watching my every move. Anxiety had become my constant companion, a gnawing presence that never quite let up. I found myself longing for the familiar faces and comforting routines of my past, but the city was vast and impersonal, and making new friends felt like an insurmountable task. Each day, I would wake up, go to work, and come home to the empty apartment, the silence weighing heavily on my mind. One evening, a few coworkers invited me to a casual gathering at Jake's place. I was grateful for the invitation, even if I wasn't entirely sure I fit in with the group. As I stepped into Jake's apartment, the sound of laughter and chatter filled the air, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the chance I needed to break out of my shell and make some new friends. But then, someone mentioned the midnight game, and the room erupted in excited whispers. I had heard of the ritual before, but I had always dismissed it as nothing more than an urban legend, a silly game designed to summon a dark entity by performing a series of eerie tasks at midnight. The idea of inviting something sinister into my already unsettling apartment didn't appeal to me in the slightest, but as Jake handed me a candle and a piece of paper with the instructions, I found myself reluctantly agreeing to participate. The apartment was dimly lit, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the walls. My friends gathered around the table, whispering excitedly as they set up the game. I tried to push aside the creeping sense of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach, but as the ritual began, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We wrote our names on pieces of paper and placed them in a circle around the candle, following the instructions to the letter. As the clock struck midnight, a heavy silence fell over the room. At first, nothing happened, and my friends joked around, their laughter echoing through the small space. But then, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I strained to listen, and soon, the whispers grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. My friends looked at me with bemused expressions, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. "It's probably just the building settling," one of them said, but there was a note of doubt in their voice. As the game continued, the noises grew more insistent, and the shadows seemed to dance across the walls. I could feel my anxiety spiking, and I tried to focus on the game, forcing a smile as I engaged with my friends. But the laughter that had once filled the room had faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the kitchen, and I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I rushed into the kitchen, my friends close behind, only to find the space in disarray, dishes scattered across the floor and the garbage can tipped over. "It's just a prank, right?" I asked, but the fear in my friends' eyes told me that they were just as terrified as I was. In a moment of desperation, I decided to confront whatever was causing the disturbances. I pushed open the apartment door and stepped into the hallway, the shadows swallowing me whole. "Is anyone there?" I called out, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard the sound of laughter again. This time, it was unmistakably coming from inside the apartment. I raced back to find my friends doubled over in laughter, but their mirth was cut short by a chilling realization. The apartment seemed to be shifting around us, shadows lengthening and darkening. The candle flickered wildly before going out, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we stumbled around, trying to find the light switch. When the lights finally came on, everything appeared as it had before, but the tension was palpable. "We need to end this," I said firmly. My friends, still shaken, nodded in agreement. We followed the instructions to close the game, but the eerie feeling didn't completely fade. As we huddled together, whispering about what we had experienced, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. The game had revealed more than just supernatural disturbances. It had magnified my internal fears and anxieties. The whispers I had heard might have been a manifestation of my own insecurities, my worry about fitting in, about being perceived as overly sensitive. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the midnight game had been a mirror reflecting my deepest fears. I started to focus more on my own well-being, learning to confront and accept my anxieties rather than letting them control me. I reached out to my friends more, sharing my feelings and finding comfort in their support. It wasn't about whether the supernatural was real, it was about confronting the shadows within myself. The apartment, once a prison of solitude, became a space of reflection and growth. The flickering lights and creaking walls no longer felt threatening. Instead, they became reminders of my journey. The shadows that had once loomed large began to shrink as I filled my life with connections and support. The midnight game had left its mark, but it had also illuminated a path forward. I discovered that confronting my fears was not just about facing the unknown. It was about understanding myself and allowing others to see my vulnerabilities. The darkness that had once consumed me began to recede, replaced by the warmth of friendship and the strength that comes from shared experiences. As I settled into my life in the city, I carried the lessons of the midnight game with me. I learned that sometimes, the scariest battles are fought within, but with courage and support, I could emerge stronger. The apartment, though small, became a sanctuary of growth and connection, where the flickering lights no longer cast shadows of fear but illuminated the beauty of resilience and friendship. The old house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside, a constant reminder of the passage of time. I stood in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the familiar faces of my children captured in faded photographs. Lucas and Mia, my two greatest joys and greatest challenges, were growing up so fast. It felt like just yesterday they were toddlers, their laughter filling the air as they played in this very room. Now, they were 11 and 9, their interests shifting to the digital world, leaving me feeling more disconnected than ever before. As a father, I often found myself struggling to keep up with the demands of work and the responsibilities of raising a family. The pressures of being the provider, the disciplinarian, and the emotional rock for my children weighed heavily on me. I longed for the days when I could easily connect with Lucas and Mia, but lately, it felt like we were speaking different languages. Their faces were often buried in screens, and my attempts to engage them in conversation were met with distracted nods and half-hearted responses. One particularly stressful Friday night, as I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, an article caught my eye. It was about the midnight game, a ritual that supposedly summoned a dark entity by performing a series of eerie tasks at midnight. The idea of playing a game with my kids, even one with such a sinister premise, ignited a spark of excitement within me. Maybe this could be the opportunity one needed to reconnect with them, to create a shared experience that would bridge the growing gap between us. I called Lucas and Mia into the living room, my voice filled with a mixture of enthusiasm and trepidation. They looked at me with curious expressions, their eyes flickering with a hint of excitement. As I explained the rules of the midnight game, their initial hesitation gave way to intrigue. We gathered the necessary items, a candle, a piece of paper, and a pen, and set to work. The atmosphere shifted as we followed the instructions, writing our names on the paper and placing it in a circle around the candle. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, and the silence of the house seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. I glanced at my children, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the flame, and I felt a pang of guilt. Had I put them in harm's way by suggesting this game? As the clock struck midnight, a chill ran down my spine. The house creaked and groaned, as if it too was holding its breath. Lucas and Mia huddled closer together, their eyes darting around the room. I tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but the tension was palpable. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the hallway, and we all jumped in fright. "It's just the wind," I said, my voice shaking slightly. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air grew thick with an oppressive presence. Lucas gripped my arm, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, I'm scared," he whispered. Mia nodded in agreement, her lower lip trembling. In that moment, I realized that I had to be the strong one, the one who protected them from the unknown. I took a deep breath and said, "It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together." We ventured into the hallway, the darkness swallowing us whole. I called out, "Is anyone there?" but the only response was the echo of my own voice. As we turned to head back to the living room, a muffled laughter reached our ears. It was coming from Mia's playroom. We raced back, only to find the room in disarray. Stuffed animals were scattered across the floor, and toys were overturned. The candle flickered violently before extinguishing, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for the light switch. When the lights finally came on, everything appeared normal, but the tension was palpable. "We need to end this," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Lucas and Mia nodded, their faces pale. We quickly followed the instructions to close the game, and as we huddled together, whispering about what had just happened, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. In the days that followed, I made a conscious effort to reconnect with my children. I apologized for the frightening experience and initiated regular family activities that allowed us to communicate and bond in a more positive way. We played board games, went on hikes, and had movie nights, creating memories that didn't involve the supernatural. As I watched Lucas and Mia laugh and play together, I realized that the true darkness I had faced wasn't the entity of the midnight game, but my own fears and insecurities as a father. The strange noises and shadows had been manifestations of my anxiety about being a good parent. The game had amplified my feelings of inadequacy and guilt, but it had also shown me the importance of facing those fears head-on. The house, once a source of unease, became a sanctuary of growth and connection. The shadows and creaks that had once filled me with dread now served as reminders of our journey together. I learned that the most important bonds were built not through fear, but through love and shared experiences. As I looked around the living room, filled with the laughter and warmth of my family, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The midnight game had illuminated the path forward, reminding me that the scariest battles are often fought within ourselves. With courage and support, we could emerge stronger, ready to face the challenges of life together. In the end, the midnight game had brought us closer than ever before. It had taught me that true connection comes not from the thrill of supernatural challenges, but from the everyday moments shared with those we love. The darkness that had once seemed so ominous began to recede, replaced by the light of genuine family relationships and the strength that comes from facing fears together. The old office building loomed over the bustling city, a relic of a time when its brick facade and ornate architecture were the epitome of style. Now, it stood in stark contrast to the sleek glass towers that surrounded it, its flickering fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the long, empty hallways. The hum of the lights and the occasional creak of the floorboards added to the sense of unease that permeated the air. It was a place that felt heavy with history, and on late nights, when the city outside buzzed with life, the office felt like a ghost town. I was Lisa, a young professional in my mid-20s, navigating the challenges of corporate life. The pressure to excel was constant, and the isolation I felt in the office only intensified my sense of being overwhelmed. I often stayed late, hoping that the extra hours would help me prove myself to my colleagues and secure my place in the company. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to focus. One particularly grueling evening, as I pored over reports in the dim light of my desk lamp, I overheard a group of my coworkers gathered in the break room. Their laughter was a welcome distraction, and I couldn't help but lean in to listen. Jake, the most adventurous of the group, was animatedly recounting a story about the midnight game, a ritual that supposedly summoned a dark entity by performing a series of eerie tasks at midnight. The idea intrigued me, and I felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of breaking the monotony of work with something so thrilling. "Come on, it'll be fun," Jake urged, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "It's just a game, right? What's the worst that could happen?" Sophie, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes. "You really think summoning a spirit is a good idea? What if it's real?" "Exactly," Jake shot back, grinning. "That's what makes it exciting. We could use a little thrill around here." Tom, another coworker, chimed in with a smirk. "I'll pass. I don't need any ghosts haunting my desk." Despite the skepticism, the idea of playing the midnight game began to take root in my mind. I was tired of feeling like an outsider in my own workplace, and the thought of engaging in something so bizarre and adventurous was enticing. After a moment of hesitation, I found myself agreeing to join them. "Okay, I'm in," I said, surprising even myself. As the clock struck midnight, we gathered in the conference room, a space that felt more unsettling than usual with its cold, metallic surfaces and empty chairs. Jake had brought the materials, a candle, a piece of paper with the game's instructions, and a sense of reluctant enthusiasm. We set up the game, writing our names on pieces of paper and placing them around the candle. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, and the atmosphere shifted from playful to tense as we turned off the lights. At first, the game was filled with nervous laughter and banter. But as the minutes passed, small, unsettling occurrences began to unfold. Papers on the desks rustled as if stirred by an unseen breeze, and the air grew noticeably colder. I tried to laugh it off, but the growing sense of unease was hard to ignore. My colleagues' jokes became less frequent, and the once light-hearted atmosphere turned heavy with apprehension. Then, without warning, the fluorescent lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced as I glanced around the room, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist. "It's just a power surge," I said, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but my voice wavered with uncertainty. The oppressive feeling in the room was palpable, and I could see the fear in my coworkers' eyes. "What's happening?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe we should stop," Tom suggested, his bravado fading. Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the office, causing us all to jump. "What was that?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. "Jake, Eva, the brave one, urged us to investigate. "Let's check it out. It's probably just a prank." We followed the noise to the break room, where we found the space in disarray, coffee mugs shattered on the floor, the refrigerator door hanging open. The chaos seemed inexplicable, and our earlier bravado evaporated, replaced by genuine fear. "Okay, this is getting weird," I said, my heart pounding. "Let's just finish the game and get out of here." As we returned to the conference room, the shadows seemed to close in around us. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing against my chest, and I fought to keep my breathing steady. The candle flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows on the walls. I tried to focus on the game, but the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere grew louder, almost as if they were speaking directly to me. In a moment of desperation, I decided to confront the source of the disturbances. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, stepping into the hallway. My voice echoed eerily, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the fluorescent lights. As I turned to head back, I heard a faint, mocking laughter, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Racing back to the conference room, I found my colleagues huddled together, their faces pale with fear. The candle flickered violently before extinguishing, plunging us into darkness once more. Panic set in as we fumbled for the light switch. When the lights finally flickered back on, the room appeared normal, but the tension was palpable. "We need to end this," I said firmly, trying to hide my own fear. My coworkers nodded in agreement, and we quickly followed the instructions to close the game. As we stood together, whispering about what had just happened, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering dread. The oppressive feeling in the office began to recede, but the experience had left us all shaken. I couldn't shake the feeling that the midnight game had revealed something more than just supernatural disturbances. It had magnified our own insecurities and fears. In the days that followed, the experience continued to haunt me. The midnight game had intensified my feelings of inadequacy and isolation. I questioned my place in the office, wondering if the game had been a manifestation of my own anxieties. The once familiar office environment now seemed foreign and unwelcoming. Determined to confront my fears, I reached out to my colleagues. I opened up about my struggles and the impact the midnight game had on me. To my surprise, they were understanding and supportive. Sophie, in particular, was empathetic and encouraging. She suggested we meet outside of work for coffee and social activities, providing a chance to build genuine connections beyond the office. Gradually, I began to open up more and share my feelings with my coworkers. Our conversations became more meaningful, and I found comfort in their camaraderie. The oppressive atmosphere of the office began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of connection and support. The midnight game had left its mark, but it also illuminated a path forward. I learned that confronting my fears and insecurities was essential for finding balance and self-acceptance. The experience encouraged me to seek out genuine connections and prioritize my mental well-being. As I settled back into my routine at the office, I carried the lessons of the midnight game with me. The flickering lights and long hallways no longer felt threatening. Instead, they became reminders of my journey. I learned that true strength came from facing my fears and allowing others to see my vulnerabilities. The office, once a source of anxiety, became a place where I could build meaningful relationships and find support. The midnight game had shown me that sometimes, the scariest battles are fought within. But with courage and the support of those around me, I could emerge stronger and more resilient. In the end, the midnight game had transformed my perspective. It taught me that while the supernatural may be frightening, the real challenges lie in our own minds. By confronting my fears and opening up to my colleagues, I found a sense of belonging that I had long sought. The experience bonded us in ways I never expected, and together, we faced the unknown, not just in the game, but in our lives. The midnight game in the neighborhood. The suburban neighborhood was a patchwork of well-kept lawns and charming houses, each one telling a story behind its closed doors. As dusk fell, the streets became quiet, with only the occasional chirp of crickets breaking the stillness. The darkness brought an unsettling calm, amplifying every creak of the trees swaying in the wind and the distant hum of traffic. It was a peaceful facade, but the isolation of the night hung heavy in the air, making the shadows seem deeper and the silence more pronounced. I was Emma, a single mother in my 30s, navigating the challenges of raising my young son, Ethan, while trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy in our lives. The weight of parenting often felt overwhelming, especially with the quiet judgment from neighbors who seemed to have it all together. My days were filled with routines, school drop-offs, work, and dinner preparations, but the nights were lonely, echoing with the insecurities I struggled to keep at bay. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I overheard a group of neighborhood kids talking excitedly about the midnight game. Their chatter was filled with both thrill and trepidation, and despite my better judgment, I felt a spark of intrigue. The idea of summoning a dark entity through a series of eerie tasks at midnight seemed absurd, but it also promised a break from our monotonous routine. I thought it might be a fun way to bond with Ethan, who was always eager for adventure. "Mom, can we do it?" Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement as he overheard the kids talking. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself nodding in agreement. "Sure, let's give it a try," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As midnight approached, I sat up in the living room with Ethan. The candle flickered on the coffee table, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan was both excited and apprehensive, his wide eyes reflecting the dim light. I tried to stay upbeat, masking my own growing unease. The game's instructions seemed straightforward: write our names on pieces of paper, place them around the candle, and follow the ritual. At first, the game felt like a harmless diversion. We followed the steps, and for a while, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The silence of the house was broken only by the soft rustling of the papers and the occasional creak of the floor. But as the minutes ticked by, a sense of discomfort began to settle in. The atmosphere grew colder, and I noticed the shadows on the walls becoming more pronounced, as if they were stretching toward us. Ethan clung to my side, his earlier excitement replaced by fear. "Mom, is this supposed to happen?" he asked, his voice quivering. I tried to reassure him, but my own anxiety was mounting. The whispers began softly at first, like a distant murmur, but they grew louder, becoming almost unintelligible. It felt as though the house itself was alive, its very walls pulsating with an ominous energy. The game quickly escalated from a mere distraction to something more sinister. Objects around the room seemed to move on their own, books fell from shelves, and the lights flickered unpredictably. The sense of unease was palpable, and I struggled to maintain my composure. Ethan's fear was evident, and his grip on my hand tightened. "Let's end this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I reached for the instructions, but just then, a loud bang echoed through the house, making us both jump. The sound seemed to come from the direction of Ethan's room. I glanced at him, seeing the terror in his eyes. "Stay here," I said, my voice firm but trembling. I moved toward the source of the noise, trying to steady my racing heart. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the flickering candle in the living room. As I approached Ethan's room, I heard the sound again, a series of loud thuds, followed by a low, guttural growl. My breath quickened as I turned the doorknob, only to find the room in disarray, furniture overturned, toys scattered, and the closet door ajar. "Ethan!" I called, my voice filled with urgency. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face pale and tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom, I don't like this," he said, his voice breaking. I gathered him into my arms, trying to comfort him as best as I could. The game had taken a toll on both of us, amplifying our fears and insecurities. I realized that it wasn't just the supernatural elements of the game that were terrifying, it was the way it reflected my own anxieties and insecurities as a parent. With Ethan clinging to me, I rushed back to the living room, determined to end the game. I followed the instructions, closing the game as quickly and accurately as I could. The oppressive feeling in the house slowly began to lift, but the lingering sense of dread remained. The once familiar surroundings now felt foreign and threatening. When the game was finally over, the house returned to its normal state, but the experience had left us both shaken. The silence of the night seemed heavier, and the shadows on the walls felt more menacing. I sat with Ethan, trying to reassure him and calm my own frayed nerves. The midnight game had revealed more than just supernatural disturbances. It had exposed my own fears and insecurities as a parent. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the experience. The game had magnified my feelings of inadequacy and isolation, but it also offered a chance for growth. I reached out to some of the neighbors, seeking their support and understanding. To my surprise, they were empathetic and willing to lend a listening ear. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who often watched over the kids, invited me over for tea. "You know, dear," she said, her voice warm and comforting, "we all have our struggles. It's okay to ask for help." Her kindness reminded me that I wasn't alone in my feelings of inadequacy. The experience prompted me to open up about my struggles and seek out connections within the community. I began to engage more with my neighbors, participating in local events and building relationships. The once quiet neighborhood became a source of support and camaraderie, helping to alleviate some of the loneliness and judgment I had felt. The midnight game had left its mark, but it also illuminated a path forward. I learned that confronting my fears and seeking support from others was essential for personal growth. The game had shown me that the darkness I faced was not just a reflection of the supernatural, but also of my own internal struggles. As I settled into a new routine, the house that once felt ominous now became a place of comfort and connection. The shadows on the walls no longer held the same menace, and the silence of the night was no longer oppressive. Instead, it was a reminder of the strength I had found in facing my fears and building meaningful relationships. Ethan and I started having regular family nights, where we would play games, watch movies, or simply talk about our days. I encouraged him to express his feelings, and in doing so, I found that I was healing too. The bond we shared grew stronger, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose as a mother. The midnight game had been a harrowing experience, but it had also served as a catalyst for change. I learned that sometimes, the scariest battles are fought within, but with courage and support, I could overcome them. The neighborhood, once a source of anxiety, had become a community where I could find solace and strength. The journey had transformed my sense of isolation into one of support and connection, and for that, I was grateful. As I tucked Ethan into bed one night, I smiled at him and said, You know, we faced something scary together, and we got through it. That makes us strong." He nodded, his eyes heavy with sleep but filled with trust. I kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door slightly ajar. In the stillness of the night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The shadows in the hallway no longer felt threatening. Instead, they were a reminder of our journey. The midnight game had tested us, but it had also brought us closer together, teaching us the importance of facing fears and seeking support. With that thought in mind, I closed my eyes, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that we would face them together. I'm Samantha, and I'm 17 now, but I still remember that night vividly. It was a few years ago, during the summer after my parents' divorce. My world felt like it was falling apart, and I was searching for something, anything, to fill the void. That's when I got caught up in the midnight game. It all started when I found an old wooden box in the attic of our house. I was looking for something to distract myself, and there it was, hidden behind some dusty old books. Inside the box were a few candles, a piece of paper with strange symbols, and a note that explained the rules of the midnight game. I had heard whispers about it from friends at school, how it could summon a spirit that would grant wishes, but at a terrible cost. I was skeptical, of course, but I was also desperate. I wanted my family back together, and the thought of a wish seemed like a way to escape my reality, even if just for a moment. So, I called Tommy, my best friend, and told him about it. He was always up for an adventure, even if it was a little reckless. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I mean, it sounds dangerous." "Come on, Tommy. What's the worst that could happen?" "It's just a game," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. That night, we gathered at my house after dark. The air was thick with anticipation as we lit the candles in my dimly lit room. I felt a mix of excitement and fear, my heart racing as I followed the instructions. I knocked on my bedroom door 22 times and said, "Midnight Man, can we play?" At first, nothing happened. We laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension. But then, the lights flickered, and I felt a chill sweep through the room. Tommy's laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. "Did you feel that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. Before I could answer, we heard a soft whisper, almost like a child's giggle, echoing from the hallway. My stomach dropped. "Maybe we should stop," I suggested, but Tommy shook his head. "No way. We have to finish what we started." We decided to head to the old abandoned house at the end of our street. It had been empty for years, and the neighborhood kids often dared each other to go inside. I figured it was the perfect place to continue the game. We grabbed a few more friends, Clara, who loved urban legends, and a couple of boys who thought they were invincible. As we entered the house, the door creaked ominously behind us. The air was stale, and the floorboards groaned under our weight. We lit the candles again, and I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. "Okay, let's do this," I said, trying to sound brave. We gathered in a circle, and I repeated the words, "Midnight Man, can we play?" The temperature dropped as if the house itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and the shadows around us seemed to stretch and twist. I could feel something watching us, something sinister lurking just beyond the edges of our light. "Guys, I don't like this," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Maybe we should leave." But before anyone could respond, the front door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we scrambled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Stay calm," Tommy shouted, though I could hear the tremor in his voice. "We just need to find another way out." We wandered through the house, our candles casting eerie shadows on the walls. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I could hear whispers, soft and taunting, echoing in the corners of my mind. "Is this part of the game?" one of the boys asked, his face pale. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to stick together." As we moved deeper into the house, we found ourselves in the basement. The air was thick and damp, and the only light came from our flickering candles. That's when we heard it, a low growl, deep and menacing. "What was that?" Clara squeaked, her eyes wide with fear. "Let's get out of here," I said, my heart pounding. But as we turned to leave, the shadows shifted, and a tall, dark figure emerged from the darkness. Its presence was suffocating, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. "Run!" Tommy yelled, and we all bolted back up the stairs, but the figure was fast. It seemed to glide through the air, effortlessly keeping pace with us. We burst out of the basement and into the hallway, but the house was a maze. We couldn't find the front door. I could hear the whispers growing louder, taunting us, feeding off our fear. "Stick together," I shouted, but the panic was palpable. We were losing our grip on reality, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. Finally, we stumbled into a room filled with old furniture and dust-covered mirrors. I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrors, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. Her eyes were wide with terror, and I could see the midnight man lurking behind her, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. "Get out!" I screamed, and we all turned to run again. But the midnight man was blocking the way, his long fingers reaching out toward us. Just when I thought we were trapped, I remembered the instructions. "We have to end the game," I shouted. "We need to extinguish the candles." In a frenzy, we blew out our candles, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a chilling laugh echoed through the house, and the midnight man vanished. We stumbled outside, gasping for breath, the cool night air hitting our faces like a wave. We didn't stop running until we reached my house, collapsing on the front porch. "What just happened?" Clara panted, her face pale. "I don't know," I replied, shaking. "But we need to forget about this. No one can know." In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different. The air was thick with unease, and I could sense that something had changed. Some of the kids who played the game started acting strange, as if they were haunted by what had happened. Tommy and I kept our secret, but it weighed heavily on us. I often found myself staring into the shadows, half expecting the midnight man to return. The experience taught me a harsh lesson about curiosity and the darkness that can lurk just beyond our understanding. Now, as I look back, I realized that the midnight game was never just a game. It was a reminder of the real monsters that can emerge when we seek out the unknown. I've learned to appreciate the safety of my home and the love of my family, and I'll never take that for granted again. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees at night, I still hear those whispers. I know I'll always be watching the shadows, just in case the midnight man decides to play again.